Hi, welcome back. Today we are talking about radios, and kind of specifically in an airsoft and prepper context. This is going to be video 1 of 2. Today we're talking about the different classes of radios and some of the licensing required around those. So to begin with, for regular civilians, individuals, not businesses, you kind of have four different options on radios. You've got ham, MURS, FRS, and GMRS. Now, ham requires you getting a license. It requires a written test. None of the areas near me administer ham radio tests to get licensed on Sunday. It's entirely on Shabbat, and that doesn't work for me. So I've never bothered with ham radio. Also, generally, most of the hams I've met seem to have this fantasy that they're the experts on dealing with disasters, and somehow when there's a disaster, they'll save the day. The reality is, during the Texas snowpocalypse, I got out one of these radios, sat it on the local ham repeater, and I heard absolutely nothing, not a single word during that. Something like 50 people froze to death. Roads were closed. These guys were silent. I have heard like 2 guys do a microphone test once on that repeater, but for the most part, and that kind of, in my mind, eliminates it for me. Next option is MURS, M-U-R-S. It stands for that. Now, MURS is 5 channels. These channels were, until very recently, only available for businesses. So as a result, there's not a lot of MURS radios on the market. It's limited to 2 watts, which is going to affect your range. You can go find MURS radios on Amazon. They're not super expensive or anything. A MURS handheld seems to cost starting at about $20-25. And obviously it goes up from there with better quality. But you don't see a lot of them out there. And one thing to keep in mind with radios is you and the guy you're talking to have to have compatible radios. So for me, that eliminates MURS. Our next option is FRS. Now the nice thing about FRS is it doesn't require a license. FRS radios have to be approved by the FCC. So instead of you being licensed as an individual, the radio is what's licensed. Now, FRS radios have 20-something channels. We can drop in the FCC website that shows the exact channels. And the radios you have to have fixed antennas. They're limited, depending on channel, to either 2 watts or a half. That changed in 2017. Prior to 2017, they were all limited to a half watt no matter what channel you were on. So a lot of older radios are still on that half watt limit. If you go to Walmart and buy a pack of radios or any other similar store, you're going to get FRS radios, almost certainly. If it's 2 radios in the same package, they're FRS radios. And they'll have some crazy claim about range on them. They never make that range number. That's absolute perfect conditions. We'll talk about radio range later. But anyways, that's your FRS. And then your last option is GMRS, the General Mobile Radio Service, I think. Now, GMRS radios do require a license, but the license does not require a test. You go on the FCC's website, you apply for your license, you pay your $35, they issue you a call sign, and that's it. If you do get a GMRS license, be aware there's a searchable database run by the FCC where if somebody has your call sign, which you're supposed to announce every 15 minutes, they can actually do a search for you and they'll get your name and whatever address you registered with. You can register with the P.O. box, but you should just be aware you're not completely anonymous. Even behind that call sign, somebody can look you up. Now, the FRS channels completely overlap the FRS channels. So if your buddy's got an FRS radio and you've got a GMRS radio, he can hear you, probably. And GMRS has a limit of up to 50 watts. So MURS and FRS is capped at 2, GMRS is capped at 50. Just as a practical thing, if you're dealing with a handheld radio like the ones behind me, and yes, I realize those are all ham radios, you're probably only transmitting at about 5 watts just because of battery limitations. The 50 watt systems are usually hardwired to like AC on electrical grid on a generator, something like that. But you do get significantly higher power out of GMRS radio. GMRS radios are, once again, like FRS, the radios are licensed. You're allowed to have removable antennas, so you can change to a nicer antenna with the GMRS radio. But the frequencies and channels all have to be pre-programmed. Generally, anytime you're dealing with frequencies, it's a ham radio. If you're dealing with channels, it's going to be FRS, MURS, or GMRS. And one other thing to keep in mind is every Airsoft event I've ever been to will assign radio frequencies per squad or per team, something like that. And everything is on the FRS GMRS frequency range. American Milsim does that, Third Coast Airsoft did that, JTAC Airsoft did that, Temple Airsoft, when they were running events, did that. It was all FRS or GMRS frequencies. Now, one thing there's a lot of confusion about is if with ham radios on GMRS and FRS, there is absolutely no license that you can get that will legally let you use a ham radio on an FRS, GMRS, or MURS frequency. Hams have their own frequency set, MURS has their own frequency, FRS, GMRS have their own frequency. So there is no licensing or permissions that you can get. If you're a licensed ham operator, you cannot take your ham radio and transmit on FRS legally. Even if you turn down the power or any of that, you can't legally do it outside of emergencies. So that's just something to keep in mind with your licensing. In terms of range, and this is kind of a lot of confusion. Realistically, out of one of these handheld devices, you're kind of capped at maybe a half mile. And it depends on the device. I've done some range tests when I was living in the suburbs. I'll post those videos or make them public later. So what I found with a 2-watt radio, walking around the neighborhood, going, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Actually, this radio, but with a different antenna. I got that to go 1/10 of a mile. Kind of pathetic. Though keep in mind, this is in the suburbs with lots of houses. When I jumped up to a 5-watt radio, I managed to get it to go roughly 0.6 miles, which was actually these 2 radios. That's what I used for that test. And I tried switching out the antennas. I still ended up at that same range limit. Now, the things between your radios have a huge effect on your range. I've got a buddy who's used these exact same type of radio with that antenna, I think. The tall one. And he's managed to shoot that 12 miles. In order to do that, he had one guy standing at the shore of a lake. Another guy drove a truck and was 12 miles away at the top of a hill, so they could literally see each other with telescopes. And they were able to get on a straight line, were able to get that 12-mile range. So when you buy a radio, keep in mind your terrain is going to be a huge impact on how far you can talk with. The terrain's the biggest factor. And I'll do a follow-up video on what radios most people use and how to set it up. That's it for now.